Today, the Secretary of the Treasury, Paulson, came before the Financial Services Committee as well as the Federal Reserve Board Chairman, Bernanke. They came to rehash the bailouts that have been going on both by Treasury and by the Federal Reserve System. Nothing new was really revealed at these hearings. I did get a chance to ask one question, and of course I directed this question to Bernanke, and it has to do with an overall philosophic issue of what's going on rather than looking at the details. In a way, these details are just sort of missing the whole point. We've already tried to bail out everybody with approximately $5 trillion, and they're dealing with the details of this, and they're shifting gears continuously. They don't seem to be working at all, and all of this is just patchwork. It's Band-Aid, and it doesn't get to the bottom of our problem. The bottom of our problem is dealing with a financial system that has existed since 1971, and it's called the fiat dollar reserve system. And this is what I pressed Bernanke on, and really quizzed him about whether they, as central bankers, have even contemplated this. And of course, he totally denied this, that they even talk about it. But quite frankly, he doesn't have to tell me, because under the law, the central bankers, our Federal Reserve Board chairman, has no obligation whatsoever. Matter of fact, the law prevents any audit of the Federal Reserve. He is not obligated to ever tell us anything about any negotiations or talking with other central planners and central bankers around the world. They can do what they want, and they are not responsible to the Congress. So when I did ask him about any plans for another reserve currency, he just said, no, they haven't done this. And yet, we've even read articles in the newspaper where they are talking about a new international reserve standard, a reserve currency, which would diminish the dollar to a large degree. And I'm quite convinced that they have discussed it, because the system we have today has ended. We've had it since 1971, and this is what this whole emergency is about, is the end of that financial system that we've had during that period of time. I also pressed them a little bit about gold, because of course throughout history, anytime a financial system breaks down, when they've abused it through inflation, that is, creating too much money and messing up with the markets, they've always had to resort to some commodity to restore confidence. And of course, he said that there's no contemplation whatsoever, but he did admit one thing. When I pressed him on the issue of gold, about whether they even talk about gold, he says, yes, they do, only about selling gold, which I think sends out a strong message, because some central banks sell gold, other central banks buy gold. I did point out at the hearings that, for instance, the Central Bank of Iran has just bought $75 billion worth of gold, and other Asian countries have bought gold. But Western central banks, because we're getting poorer and Asia is getting stronger, we are and have been selling gold. But the purpose of selling the gold is to pretend that the dollar is much stronger than it really is. If they didn't sell gold, or had not been selling gold over these last several years or the last decade, the price of gold would be very much higher, and it would indicate the dollar is so much weaker. Just as they did in the 60s, they propped up the dollar by pretending it was backed by gold at $35 an ounce. But that wasn't the case, and finally in 71 is when Bretton Woods broke down, and then the gold price exploded. Or the other way you look at this is the dollar really crashed. And that's what they're doing today. And he did say at least that they were talking about selling gold. But the one issue that he admitted that he agreed with me on was the current account deficit. That is our yearly deficit that we run up. It contributes to our foreign deficit. And he admitted that we should be concerned about it. It is a problem. He claimed it was getting better. But this is a reflection of a fiat monetary system. Under the gold standard, if there are current account deficits, they have to be adjusted immediately. That is, gold flows out of the one country into the from the debtor nation into the other countries, and then people have to go back to work and prices have to come down, and there's an automatic mechanism under a commodity standard to adjust for these distortions. But because the dollar was fully trusted all these years, the distortions just went on and on and on, and they admit the problem, but they don't admit, or maybe they don't understand where the problem comes from, because they don't want to admit that it's central banking that's fault, and they certainly wouldn't want to give any credit to a commodity standard of money. And yet, this is exactly what the problem is. We have propped up the system for way too long. Every time we've had a crisis since 1971, we've been lucky, and the central bankers have been lucky. And I made this point in the hearing that they have reason to believe that maybe their monkeying around one more time might help. But quite frankly, the world doesn't believe it anymore. But every time the market tried to override what they were doing since 1971, every time we had a recession, the problem was temporarily papered over with more spending, more debt, and more printing press money. But this time, it isn't working. And that is the big issue of the day. But I could not get him any time to admit that they really need a new standard. If anything, he defended the dollar and said the dollar is just great and wonderful, and that's why everybody's buying dollars right now, and it's temporarily that is the case. People are using the dollar as a temporary haven for various reasons. But the financial system that was based on the fiat dollar reserve currency, it has ended. And the sooner we admit that, the better. And the sooner we admit that just buying up bad debt and propping up mortgages that aren't viable and buying and propping up car companies that are insolvent, the sooner we admit that, the better. And the sooner we can go back to work. But then, once again, we do need a new monetary system. But we don't need a meeting of the central bankers over in Europe, secretly or otherwise, getting together and devising a new currency and developing worldwide regulations, as they talked about at the G20 meeting here just this last weekend. That will not solve our problem. The answers can come in sound money, money that governments can't print and secret central banks and Federal Reserve systems can't create out of thin air. That cannot happen. We have to have a money that isn't created, because that restrains the government and it irons out all these problems and doesn't allow these bubbles to form. But every single day that passes, it becomes more crucial that we admit the truth, that we're in deep trouble because of the flawed monetary system that we've had, and that we have to do something about it. But we don't need another law to do it. We just need the release of the marketplace to allow the market to work. And all we have to do is obey our Constitution and say that there is no authority in our Constitution for a central bank, and there's no authority in our Constitution to print money out of thin air, and that only gold and silver can be legal tender. If we would adhere to that, balance our budget, curtail our spending, and come back home financially, from all the spending we do and the military activity overseas, the sooner we do that, the sooner we'll solve our problem.